All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brittany Higginbotham. Thanks for joining us today for this IPR webinar with Edelman on their 2023 Future of Corporate Communications. My name is Brittany Higginbotham, Communications and Digital Specialist for the Institute for Public Relations. Today, we have Margot Edelman, General Manager of Edelman, New York. She's going to be presenting the findings. And we have Steve Barrett, VP and Editorial Director for PR Week, who'll be moderating our panel conversation. On our panel, we have IPR Chair Unique Woodall, a VP Communications, Customer Experience, Retail at CVS Health. And then we also have Alex Thompson, Global Chair, Corporate Affairs and Impact at Edelman, followed by IPR Trustee Ariel Patrick, Chief Communications at Ariel Investments. And with that, I'll hand it over to Margot to begin our presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you so much to our panelists for taking their time out of their day to join us. And thank you to everybody who has joined us. So I'm going to be taking you through the findings from our Future of Corporate Communications report. And then, of course, we'll be hearing from our panelists sort of a more fulsome discussion of the results, what they're seeing sort of in their own sort of day-to-day work, and then have an opportunity for questions. So next slide. So this is our second report that we're doing on the future of corporate communications. We did a study in 2021 that really revealed that it's communicators' mandate to be an indispensable partner to the C-suite and to drive measurable business value at a time, of course, right coming out of the pandemic, when business leaders were forced to confront incredible complexity and there was no clear playbook for success. And of course, in 2023, what we wanted to do is to assess how much progress has been made by comms leaders, in particular, as the dynamic of stakeholder capitalism is more fraught with complexity and impact than ever before. And of course, even just in the last month or so, it's gotten even more complex with everything going on in the world. So I think the findings in this report are perhaps even more relevant than ever. Next slide. So what did we research? So specifically, we looked at 220 C-level heads of comms across the Fortune 500 and the Forbes Global 1000 to understand what are they experiencing, what do they anticipate. So specifically, we spoke to 218 participants. We did 3 months of research. We had over 20 conversations. And really what we found is that they are really under pressure today. And if you look down here, these are all the areas in which we spoke to people. So for sectors, it was financial services, tech, manufacturing, retail. Company headquarters were mainly located in North America, although some in EMEA. And then we almost 60% publicly traded, but 40% privately held. So what did we uncover? There are a couple key insights into the continued evolution of the CCO. And I think what's really important here is today more than half of comms leaders surveyed actually consider themselves to be a strategic advisor or partner to business leaders in the organization. And that's compared to just over a third 2 years ago. So I think people in our respective roles continue to sort of advance and really continue to see themselves as indispensable. But specifically, there are 4 core findings. Number one, the post-COVID era has really cemented comms' role as a critical strategic partner. As the world has gotten more complex, the role of comms is more important than ever, and the role of comms to be a strategic leader is more important than ever. Secondly, communicators provide counsel that actually guides enterprise-level decision-making. It's not just making decisions for the PR team or just saying, oh, we'll put a press release out about that. It's really about informing decisions that are made by the C-suite. Of course, the enterprise agenda is driven by new multi-stakeholder dynamic, and communications now messages from the inside out. So again, it's not just about saying, okay, we're gonna PRize the decisions. It's using the information that comms provides in order to make the decisions in the first place. And then lastly, and I think this is really interesting, especially with sort of the backlash against ESG, adjusting to new stakeholder capitalism reality takes time. Of course, as functions and leaders contend for the acceleration of technology, the continued question over sort of how to communicate about ESG. And of course, in the world we're all experiencing today, clear geopolitical forces that are impacting everybody's day-to-day lives and everybody's business. Next slide. So what's the state of play for comms today? What we really hear loud and clear is that senior leadership in companies are calling on comms to advise on business and societal concerns, really firmly cementing the function and its leader as a critical partner in enterprise strategy. Next slide. So today, CCOs spend nearly 1/5 of their time counseling the CEO on non-comms activities. That's equivalent of almost 1 full day a week. Next slide. And demands on communicators, I'm sure as everyone on this call knows, continue to expand, and the pressure is mounting. Over 3/4 of CCOs agree their CEO demands more of them today than a year ago. But it's not only the CCO. Here are the top 6 forces most impacting the comms function or agenda. It's demands from the board of directors or other senior leaders, pressure to engage on social issues, potential changes in the regulatory environment, AI disruptors in tech, the increased importance of sustainability and climate, and finally, geopolitical issues. And communicators are actually expected to manage a vastly different set of stakeholders today. Yesterday, and this is sort of the classic group of people that comms ladders into and cares about, its media, its customers, and its investors, and again, really focus on media. Today, it's much bigger. It's media, customers, investors, employees, talent, suppliers and partners, the general public, regulators, activists, NGOs, and I'm sure the list is even longer than that. So it's a much broader world that we're operating in, and it's a much broader world that we're communicating in. And I think this is a great quote. It's how do we think about managing our stakeholders end to end? And yes, there'll be copies of the slides. So what is the new leading indicator? It's interesting. Comms was once predominantly tasked with executing C-suite priorities, but now that positioning has changed. Comms actually can foreshadow and direct executive leaders' attention to the next frontier of value creation, but also around reputational risk. So really importantly, we've gone from sort of the order takers and the people sort of, again, sending out the messages to really informing what decisions should be made. And of course, and the key thing here is that comms is informing and guiding enterprise decision-making from the central position as a connector. It's discerning and interpreting signals from the expanding stakeholder set that's of growing importance to the C-suite. So it's really that connector function. It's as a comms leader, what are you hearing from all the different stakeholders, both inside and outside of an organization, that you can then channel up to the C-suite when making decisions. And of course, more than just the CEO's perspective has shifted. Post-pandemic reality has positioned the comms function and its leader at the intersection of many different factors that might drive business. So people agree that the comms function provides indispensable partnership, delivers high overall value across the org, strengthens connections across the enterprise. And who do people in the comms function partner with? It's, of course, the CEO, but it's also the general counsel, human resources, investor relations, and marketing. So even within an organization, the comms function has a much broader set of stakeholders and a much broader set of partners. And the insights gained are helping CEOs make more informed decisions regarding when and how to address issues, and of course, to drive change in an uncertain environment. So 76% of general public say the CEOs need to drive change rather than maintain the status quo, which comes from our trust barometer. And 89% expect CEOs to address treatment of employees, which is the top issue they feel where CEOs should take a public stance, again, from our trust barometer. These are things that CEOs and decisions CEOs are expected to make. So how can the comms lead help? Specifically, 8 out of 10 of CCOs actually say they directly collaborate with their CEO to address social issues, and 98% of CCOs say their relationship with their CEO is more important than ever. So again, it's that interplay between the increased expectations of a CEO and then what can someone who is, a PR person who is in the close to the C-suite, how can they help them live up to these expectations? Again, another interesting data point, CCOs are brought in earlier into the decision-making process, and there's an expectation for consumer-grade data-enabled insights from all stakeholder groups. So, we ask comms people, when are you typically brought into conversations about important business decisions with senior leadership? 64% say it's when the decision path has been tentatively identified, but leaders want input around the reputation. 27% actually, interestingly, say it's before the business decision has been taken, and only 9% say it's after the business decision has already been made. And I think if we went back 5 or 10 years, these numbers would look very different in terms of the relationship between the comms lead and the CEO. And reputation begins inside. So CCOs are balancing, of course, complex forces with today's stakeholder reality, and employees are solidified as one of the most important voices driving risk and value creation. So comms is increasingly held accountable for ensuring that employee concerns are heard and the social issues they care about are addressed. So employee-related outcomes or metrics that the comms function has been formally held accountable for over the past year: employee engagement, employer brand, stakeholder engagement, employee diversity, equity, and inclusion, and employee retention. And I think it's a great quote. My comms function used to be seen as externally focused. We're now 75% internally focused because it starts inside. If we take care of our people, they take care of our customers, and our shareholders are happy. I think that is a quote that sort of perfectly encapsulates the shift towards employees today. And of course, in a moment of heightened complexity, organizations are doubling down on purpose. More than half of the CEOs surveyed say they're tasked with fostering a sense of purpose and meaning among employees, but that means operating meaningfully before execution. So in fact, 1/5 of comms leaders say they're actually responsible for ensuring corporate purpose anchors decision-making and strategy. So again, it's not just about execution, it's about the strategic components. So what areas are the comms team actually called on to help support? It's 86%, of course, say it's clear comms of corporate purpose to employees, stakeholders, and the public. 57% say it's fostering a sense of purpose and meaning among employees. 31% say it's actually aligning the corporate purpose with the values and goals of the org. And 21% say it's ensuring the corporate purpose drives decision-making and strategy. So it really ranges as to where sort of a different comms lead might fall in how they communicate purpose or what areas they're responsible for communicating purpose in. But for the vast majority, it's incredibly important. Tomorrow's communications agenda. In the coming months, comms leaders expect their roles and functions to focus even more heavily on integrating data, building cross-functional partnerships, and preparing for the external environment in order to strengthen trust and competitive advantage at their companies. So key considerations for comms leaders. Number one, AI is already having an impact on business. So for the comms leaders on this call, how are you building the business case for investing in comms technology adoption and AI? Comms alone can't lead the charge, but we need to sort of build the case for the use of AI tools. And really everybody on the call needs to be arming themselves with understanding what AI is going to do to our function. And AI, of course, is going to have the impact it's going to have on business overall. Secondly, ESG is continuing to evolve in both name and focus. In the face of pretty significant polarization around ESG, is your function sufficiently connected within the organization to successfully navigate this very tricky landscape? How do you navigate in a way that allows the organization to keep sort of focus on ESG, perhaps not get distracted by the terminology of ESG, where there have been some pushback? And secondly, knowing how important ESG is in Europe, are you overly US-centric? Are you really thinking sort of with a global mindset when it comes to ESG? And lastly, geopolitical forces are expected to have a significant impact on comms over the next year, given the wave of critical elections around the world. And as we have seen from sort of everything in the Middle East, it has already had a significant impact, even sort of after this data was collected. So of course, it's about sort of what are you doing to prepare? But some things, you can't prepare for, but some things it's, important just to know if and when something happens, here's how we would respond, or here's who we would respond to first. Do we take an employee, start with your employee approach? So, there's a lot of ways in which, even if you don't necessarily know, of course, what's going to happen in the world, how would you approach it? What's sort of the philosophy behind it? So that sort of we're all prepared for sort of the turbulent world that we live in. And with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Brittany and then to Steve and our panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Margot. Now we're going to transition to the moderated panel portion. Steve, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Margot. It's a really interesting report. Lots of fascinating findings from it and well worth checking out. And we want to lay a bit of context on it now by talking to some people at the cutting edge. It shows that comms is much more respected. It's found that seat at the table. We don't really need to have that conversation anymore. That's great, but it comes with new challenges. So you have to step up and deliver and prove that you're delivering when you're talking at a C-suite level. And you have to have the resources to fulfill these new responsibilities. And that's discussed in the report, and as are a bunch of other things. So we've got Yannick Woodall, who heads comms at CBS, Ariel Patrick, who heads comms at Ariel Investments. Although I believe that's no relation, Ariel. We should make that clear. It's not your firm, is it?
It's Ariel at Ariel, the joke.
Yeah, there you go. And Alex, keeping the A theme going, Alex Thompson, who's at Edelman, but has had senior roles in-house as well. So all three can provide great context here. Yannick, let's start with you. Do the findings of the report tally with what you're seeing on a practical level, especially in terms of the respect within which the function is held by the CEO and the C-suite? It does feel like COVID kind of brought on or supercharged a trend that was already happening, but that it really made everybody aware of how important comms and PR is to the whole organization, and it just supercharged you and us. It's great for PR Week as well, obviously, to a new level.
I agree, Steve. I would say in prior roles and in this role, it has supercharged. That's a great word to use, supercharged. And I would say what is most fascinating about the study is I can't wait to see that number on a 27% continue to rise. Because one of the things that we've talked about a lot as comms leaders in the industry is being able to weigh in when they're thinking about a decision. But I don't think we want to weigh in. I think we want to be a part of the conversation. So we want to understand the business problem and where we're going, understand how that's aligned with the imperatives of the organization, and be a part of that conversation to get to the decision. So I'm looking forward to that pendulum to swing much further.
Yeah, it's and I've often been sat with CCOs, and suddenly the phone starts pinging with texts, and they're from the CEO. This is direct communication. This isn't during a crisis. So, and it's a daily basis where you're having conversations with the top executives in the company, and that's good. I mean, it can be a bit of a pain when you're getting a dozen at 6:30 in the evening or whatever, but it shows the respect and that you're one of those counselors that they go to first. Ariel, how does that resonate with what you're seeing in your particular sector where money is and funding is the big currency?
Sure, and I just wanted to also thank IPR, Edelman, everyone for having us. This is probably the best Zoom I've had today. And part of that is because in our industry, every single day there's a fire drill. Every single day there's a crisis, an error, some risk that's being assessed. And I think that particularly in the financial industry, I would say probably around the financial crisis, it became abundantly clear that reputation was central to the risk framework, not only at the C-suite level, but also at the board governance level. And so as a result, we're seeing more diverse management teams to include communications, corporate affairs, marketers, as well as that expertise actually being brought into the boardroom, which is a new thing. I mean, I think, back in the day, if you were a CMO or CCO, people would say it would be impossible for you to get on a corporate board. we're seeing that's changing as well. And so, for example, in my role, part of the reason I was so thrilled to join Ariel was the opportunity to be on the operating committee alongside our CFO, our general counsel, our CEO. So totally agreed with Unique that we're in a new day, and it'll only continue as institutions have to think about the sentiment of pretty much every stakeholder that crosses their path. We're in the digital age where everyone is their own journalist, and there's no stakeholder that can be left behind.
Absolutely. Yeah, very true. Alex, you're in a unique position, not unique, but you've had the opportunity to work on the client side at some great brands, and now you're in agency at Edelman. So how did you find it when you were in the house, and having that broader insight into a lot of different businesses at Edelman must have given you a wider perspective as well. How does that resonate with the findings of this survey?
Yeah, I mean, the findings are on point, really, I would say. I mean, these crossed my desk on, I think it was the first week of my being back. We'd come out of field, and I was interested to learn about it because I was going to have to stand in front of the findings, having not sort of helped to develop them. But I read the report and sort of said, yeah, that reflects my experience. And it's worth mentioning that I spent the first decade of my career in agency, and then I went in-house, and then I came back to agency. And a lot of people have said, why have you come back to agency? That's a different conversation. But I just sort of, I think I'd mention a couple of things here, Steve. So I think that PR and communications practitioners throughout my career have demonstrated a really unhealthy sort of inferiority complex as it relates to kind of corporate power dynamics. And it really gets in the way, in my opinion, of mature leadership. And we don't need to be told by a report that we can be the top counselors to boards and management. But it does help when we know that people are doing it, because you feel like you have some solidarity. Now, in my last two roles, I probably spent 25% of my time on board matters. Whether it's moving a decision through a board on an important policy issue, whether it is helping to explain and present strategy on particular issues which are pertinent to the organization, or perhaps, during COVID and Ukraine, actually being a key decision maker in those situations. And I think it's worth mentioning to the people who are on the call that as a career path, if you get to the place where, whether in agency or on the client side, you're doing that type of work, it's really good work. It's fascinating, it's interesting, it's difficult, it's high pressure. It's a great career path. And I think in this moment, we need to recognize that the world around us feels pretty tough. And there are certain jobs where you get to understand the interlocking pressures of government, of media, of academic institutions, of NGOs. And it's a really privileged seat to sit in. So just a couple of points, though. I think, certainly in the last two roles that I held, they weren't comms alone, and that helped. So my function, I oversaw government and regulatory affairs, ESG strategy, and the Social Impact Institute, as well as the comms piece. You don't have to have all those bits to be in the conversation, but it does help as you're going through your career, I think, to put at least a foot or a few toes in a couple of adjacent spots, because it just gives you leverage in discussions. And the same was true with REI. Last comment to make, I also think it's a huge distraction to think too much about whether you report directly into this person or that person. I have very happily reported to general counsels, chief customer officers, chief legal officers, CHRO, and I've treated those reporting lines as a way to learn the operations of a business from the inside. And man, do you learn like how a company works if you're working directly into a chief people officer for a few months. It's like it's gold dust. And some of the chief communications officers I know that report directly to CEOs wish they wouldn't, It's not necessarily a good thing to have these folks calling you at every day of the hour. So I don't know if that sort of touches on the points, but I definitely think this report was was actually on the money. And I love the emphasis that Margot put on spending time on the people problem. People build brands. You must focus on people. And it's a joy to spend 60% of your time on internal. That's a real gift. You learn the business that way.
Yeah, it's a good point on the reporting lines, because people do over obsess with it. It's more about the people holding those roles rather than their job title. I think if you've got, you could work for a CEO who you just don't mesh with, and that destroys the trust. But yeah, that's a good point, Alex. Kind of segues nicely into an interesting finding from the report that talks about how CCOs are spending nearly 1/5 of their time on what the report calls non-comms activities. And I'd love to dig into that a little bit. First of all, and I'm not sure how we're defining non-comms here, because the report mentions things like supply chain, product issues, employee issues. Well, I would argue, and I think all three of you would, that employee issues and employee engagement is very much a comms activity. So I guess, I don't know if Margot, you wanted to say a line on just how you define non-comms, and then
I think we exactly that. We sort of gave people examples of what sort of non-comms activities would be, just like you said. To be honest, I think in perhaps the next report we should rethink how we're framing up the question, because I do think as we really talk about in the report, so much is informed by comms, because you really do need to understand, okay, what's the impact going to be internally, what we're saying or doing, what's the impact going to be externally. So I think we also need to redefine what comms activities are. I think you've hit a really good point. But I think we're thinking of non-comms activities as like you're not writing a blog post or a press release, which are more sort of the classic things. But given the role today, I think you're completely right that we should reframe how we talk about it ourselves.
All right. Yeah, I think if you're at that top table, everything's a comms issue, right?
You're totally right. You're totally right. And I think that's what the report makes the case for. So we will change it in the next one.
There you go. You can have that one for free, courtesy of PR Week. No, all right, Yannick, but you are kind of talking to lots of different parts of the business and getting involved in different things, whether that's labor relations, whether that is product issues, supply and sales, and that's all really important, isn't it? So I don't think you can, as a comms person, to Alex's point earlier about the skills, you can't just say, oh, I'm not really a numbers person anymore, or I don't understand a balance sheet, or I don't really do sort of business. Business has got to be an underpinning of the modern CCO.
But I think Alex makes a very good point, and I would love to take it from there. The word I think is agile, right? So many times, especially in larger organizations or even smaller organizations where you're wearing many different hats, everything is not going to fall within your remit. So just the structure alone encourages you to be what I like to call jokingly the ringmaster. So it's being at different tables, understanding the conversation, and really double clicking on the operations and how that rolls up to the overall communications plan that's aligned with the business objectives. So certainly I have as well gone up to general counsel, COO, chief customer officer, a number of things. So that's one. The second piece that I would love, that I think dovetails that, is making sure that we take our strategic partners along for the ride. And what I mean is not just internally, but externally. Our agency partners are much more pinpointed when we're taking them along for the journey and giving them the information and understanding the discussions that we're having internally. That is anything from what do we need to dial up to what we need to dial down, to the issues that are pressing us today, to the issues that are pressing us over the next 6 to 8 months within the industry, just a true focus of that. And then the third with that agile piece is, what are we doing with that information with our teams? Is that bleeding through our teams from us? So the most senior people tend to have a seat at the table and they're having the conversations, but are we coming back and are we merging where we're going, what those conversations look like, the understanding, which is important because that fine-tunes the work they're doing with also what we're seeing in the industry. And that to me is a training and development. That's a pipeline that makes us smarter with resources. So I think those top 3 things.
Okay. And Ariel, how does it work in your organization in terms of working across the functions? Maybe especially with ESG. You know, we've seen some private equity companies come under pressure because of some of the investments they're doing. We saw that with BlackRock, which made a big thing about purpose being at the center. You know, that requires a very nuanced approach from communications and is kind of, I mean, it's at the core of comms, but it's kind of beyond communications as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that in the 21st century, especially as we are so focused on the many different definitions of DEI or DEIB, however you want the acronym to look, back to the comment about what are comms activities, pretty much everything is. So you mentioned supply chain. You know, having lack of diversity in your vendor mix could be a reputational issue. You know, you mentioned HR matters. Struggling to appropriately mobilize diverse people, you know, to senior levels within your organization, that becomes a reputation issue. And then, you know, as you mentioned, you know, ESG matters that are philanthropy adjacent, right? Sort of where you're putting your capital and also how you invest and how you define responsible investing. All of that comes back to reputation. So nothing is safe. Everything is a comms issue, which is why, back to Alex's point, I'm so pleased to hear him say this. It was really important to me, not only to be on the OC, that's one thing, but also to take the opportunity to do more than comms. So in my role, I'm actually a hybrid CMO CCO, even though my title is just CCO. I should have thought about that when negotiating my package. But anyway, I oversee marketing, I oversee brand. We just did a 2-year rebrand. I oversee philanthropy and government affairs. It's end of year. I have to start submitting my performance review. I need to double down on some of that. But anyway, it's a lot. But being an octopus is incredibly important and enables me to almost function. Sometimes I joke that I should be our COO. We actually have an incredible head of operations, by the way, but because often people aren't talking to each other. So I'm usually the one in the meeting that says, I think we're missing someone on this Zoom, or can we connect the dots here? Can we bring more people into the conversation and ensure we're looking at this holistically, looking at the impact down the line? And I think the other piece that's important about having marketing in your remit is that you are much closer to understanding how capital comes in and out of the door at your institution. And that's really, at the end of the day, your goal is to protect assets and you know, grow assets. So I can't really imagine being able to do my job without being in lockstep with our sales team twice a week.
Yeah, some great points there. I love the supply chain point. The CMO, I think the average tenure is maybe 2.5, 3 years, whereas CCO is 4 to 5. So maybe you go for the CMO salary, but the CCO job title, I don't know. I'm only joking. Alex, one of the issues here is lots more responsibility, lots more on the plate of the CCO. But one of the findings in the report was that no particularly increase in resources, right, in budgets. So you're kind of expected to do less, it's more with less. And part of that is down to, I guess, this year has been a tough year. I think most corporations have been keeping a very high control on costs and will do moving into next year. So how do you do that? How do you step up and deliver to a much higher standard, because you are in the room with the business leaders, whilst maybe not having extra resources to do it?
I mean, just in the spirit of, I've got absolutely no idea who's on this call, the sort of 161 people. So I'm going to treat that as a massive cone of silence, but and realize this is going to be publicized. But, you know, I would say that it can be quite tough in-house, you know, it really can. And, you know, I certainly went through a period where our strategic plan involved stripping $600 million of cost out of the business on an annual basis from like sort of operating costs. That's not an insignificant sum of money for a business with a $6 billion revenue line. I mean, it's pretty serious work. when you're doing that when you're transforming a business, and I don't meet a company today in my role at Edelman where the business isn't transforming. When you're transforming a business, the pressure on in-house teams and the stress on in-house teams who are under-resourced, very often you've got one person resourcing a couple $2 billion business. The pressure is immense, and it's pretty hard slog sometimes. And I would say that, look, part of the reason I came back to the agency side was that much as I loved learning the business in-house, I walked the halls here and they were just the best communications, strategy, digital thinkers in the world. And I'm bumping into them every 3 minutes and talking about the subjects that we care about. This morning, we launched a massive report on climate trust. And we had about 700 clients, I think the number was, join that conversation. And we're discussing what does it mean to build trust in institutions and move people from pessimism to optimism. So to your point, Steve, you learn the business on the in-house, definitely, but you aren't exposed minute to minute to people who necessarily think and operate like you do. And that can feel really quite lonely at times, particularly if you spark from creatives. And I know that I get a lot of my energy from creative work as much as from the sort of business of comms. So look, I sit in this role now feeling a huge amount of empathy for CCOs and their teams who are carrying a very, very heavy load most of the time. And I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be potentially even tougher. So we on the agency side have to do a really good job of empathy, and not just empathy of like, okay, you've got a deadline, maybe you're not turning up to a call, but really trying to understand the stresses and strains. And consider that a CCO today, going back to this presentation and Margot's comments, if you're making a decision, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I know you're going to move back to others, but let's say you're making a decision about human rights in your business. Let's say you're making a decision about the well-being of your people. Let's say you're making a decision about Israel, Gaza. Let's say you're talking about, the critical importance of acting on climate change. CCOs are involved in all those types of discussions. And the stress on the individual when they're taking all this information in and they've got this multi-stakeholder world to navigate, and you're trying to operate, like you said, Ariel, as an octopus, that is a really serious job you're sitting in there. So I think a huge part of what we need to do as an industry is think much more about the stresses and strains of this work and how we can be there for one another when bluntly we're at overload on information.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing to that point, which is not only is it incredibly stressful and isolating and lonely, you also don't do your best work. So full disclosure, I'm an Edelman alum. I had only worked in agencies before coming in-house. And what I consistently push myself and my team on is avoiding navel gazing. So it's not possible to come up with the best ideas if you're not taking notes from others in the industry. So IPR plug, part of the reason I joined the board of IPR was just the opportunity to know about webinars like this, be able to meet people like Yannick, and have someone I could call to compare notes. Because frankly, I personally would rather poach people from agencies than hire agencies. So I actually don't work with an agency. But we still, once you get really consumed with one company, you lose the larger plot and your ideas just get so stale. And that's probably why, the average CMO is 3 years, the average CCO is 4 to 5. CEOs need fresh thinking in cycles. And I think it's very easy to just fall into this pattern of, well, this is how we've always done it, and playing it safe.
Yeah, it speaks to Yannick's point earlier about agency partners, doesn't it? And having support from them.
Absolutely. And taking them along for the journey so that you're looking at where you need to double click and really dial up on resources. So, and to Ariel's point, the industry, the information that comes to the industry, ask yourself the question, Am I involved in organizations like IPR? And am I getting that information? Do I have a board of trustees that I can give a call and see? Because we're all faced with the same thing. The other piece is there's incredible work that comes out of IPR Plug. And are we sharing that with our teams, which makes them smarter? But does it go beyond the comms team? So how are we packaging up that information and giving that to our client portfolios within the organization? The other piece is you hear a lot in the industry about doing more with less. What I always tend to ask myself, the question is, did we move the goalpost? Are we focused on the right things? Where the company is putting the lion's share of their investment, are my comms imperatives aligned with that, and the lion's share of my investment going into those buckets? And if there's a gap, then there's an issue and there's something to discuss, right? And so there's the old adage of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Actually, if it's not broken, it still may need to be fixed. So, the going back, and just because legacy, we did it this way, we should always do it this way, question itself. The conversation may come back to do the same thing again, but there's nothing wrong with speaking outside of the company, in the industry, find out what others are doing that might help fine tune what's happening inside the organization. The other piece that I would add on is what is so great about communications professionals, and the fact that we are typically a shared service. So we have a seat at a lot of different places. We know the focuses. So let's use digital tools for an example. If there is a big focus within your organization on technology and they're making an investment, is there a possibility that you could serve as a catalyst, an example for that? Can that be tested and concepted out of communications, which may give you the resources that you need and the budget that you need? So does that work all the time? No, but are those conversations happening? So once again, going back to the top where Alex said, a lot of the things that we do does not fall within our remit. No, we don't have the budgets to do everything, but throughout the organization, there are focuses in how can we collaborate to set an example. And if we're setting that example, maybe a larger investment comes down the line.
That's a good point, Yannick. And if you're the liquid that runs through the whole organization, you can get involved in projects that aren't necessarily directly funded out of yours, like you said, and tap into other pots of money, the CEOs or the C-suite pot or others, HR. So really good point there. Just a note about Q&A. If you have some questions, we're moving towards that section. Can you put the questions in the Q&A segment at the bottom there? And I'm just going to finish this sort of panel part of the discussion. I'm also going to go, the point about networks is great, and most CCOs have formal and informal networks, and I'm just going to give a plug for the PR Week CCO Partner Network as well, which Alex, I think you came to a few of those since I'm here, and we are PR people, or at least we write about it. So just to finish this segment, what's on the horizon? We've mentioned it's not going to be any quieter next year. Let's just put it that way, with the elections, with the continuing geopolitical situation, horrific conflicts around the world, continued business transformation, et cetera, et cetera. So how's the comms role going to develop, especially in terms of proving ROI to the most senior leaders of your organizations? Let's start with you, Ariel.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Interesting. I think this is it's less about our role and its value to the C-suite, since I think we've made that abundantly clear, but I think it's more about our stance and how we're pursuing our work. I think historically, post George Floyd, there was a lot of fear, and I think a lot of communication strategies were focused on avoiding getting canceled. And I think now we're seeing, I actually think digital audiences are actually bored of canceling people. We've evolved beyond that. I think it's actually more about really reassessing trust, rebuilding it, knowing that that's possible. I mean, heck, Ivanka Trump was at Kim Kardashian's birthday party the other day. I mean, she's had quite a rebound. It's not the same environment of, say this or you're out. So really just bringing more sophistication to admitting when your institution maybe isn't doing all the right things, tackling that up front, being brave and transparent, and proactive about that, and just outlining where your shortcomings are and what remediation is taking place, as opposed to sort of that virtue signaling narrative that we've been seeing, where everyone's just sort of copying and pasting the same impact statements. So I think it'll make for more interesting work.
Okay, Alex.
I really like what Ariel was talking about there. I guess I have three words. I think character, courage, and resilience. And so I don't think any of those words is terribly original, but I'm not trying to be original. I just want to be practical on this one. I think we are on the brink of like probably the hardest period in our profession's recent history. I think the next 3 years are going to, if you're operating out of the US, this is going to feel very, very, very tough indeed, no matter what happens politically. But it's going to be tough, not just because of the because of the presidential election, just the forces that are at play in Europe, in Asia Pacific, in Africa. They are all going to collide, and it is going to be more complicated, not less complicated. So it's going to be tough. So why character? My view to Ariel's comments is that everybody ran towards, helping their brands be part of a really positive conversation in 2016 on climate change. We all know the story of solidarity, sorely overdue on George Floyd. But in the last year or so, and this is exactly why I came back to agency, I felt like at the first sign of a challenge, people lost their mettle a bit here. And we need to find a way to say, what does it mean to state that you are for brands and businesses making an impact? And then to find yourself under fire and to back away immediately. So this is a question of character. And I think leaders need to find their character and decide what that means for them. And I think that is true all the way through down to the account executive. So this is an important moment to determine what kind of leader you want to be in a moment of challenge. On courage, it is totally possible to be for issues which are controversial and to drive progress on those. You just have to be smarter about how. Get more sophisticated, think more deeply. To Ariel's point, don't just copy paste somebody else's point of view. Think deeply about the action, move forward. Working from a position of fear in life isn't fun. And being afraid of what people are going to say about your brand if you choose to do something courageous isn't fun. Choosing to do something ambitious is fun because you're building something. So be courageous and think about doing it better, not running away from what you previously did. And then last, on resilience, I think that one of the skills we've got to learn isn't just be resilient, which all PR people and comms people are. I think we actually need to decide what the systems are we put in place so that we can build and be resilient in the moment. And I think that takes becoming more of a sort of an HR professional in some ways than previously might have been the case. I don't think it's going to be easy to navigate people through the next 2-3 years or so. We've got to get brilliant at that. And I think we've always been average.
Yeah, good point. And actually, one bold piece of work I recall very well from your time at REI was the Black Friday decision to shut all your stores. Say, get out there and use our products. That was a very bold decision and a lot of revenue potentially lost. But in the long term, it was a great strategy. Yannick, how's the next 15 months looking for you?
So a couple of things. This is going to sound weird. So we talk about this VUCA environment, right? It's volatile, it's ambiguous, and there's a lot to be said about it. I'm going to take that glass half full. What that means is that the lines are blurring. There are no lines, and anything can be questioned. So conversations that we probably would not have had 5 years ago can be put on the table for alignment with inside organizations. And then I think Alex said it well, quite frankly. One other point that I would add on is our HR professionals are one of our greatest strategic partners. What we call in some companies associate resource groups, colleague resource groups, employee resource groups is such a great way to find out the sentiment on how our people are feeling, because this is a people business, all of it. It's a people business. It's run by people. So their feelings matter. How we're communicating to them matters, and making sure that we continue to keep our finger on the pulse matters.
Thanks, Yannick. That's great. So we've got some questions from the audience. I won't go around the table on all of them, but I'll pick out people for the different ones. One from Tech Feng Chuan, talking about globalization, I think, and with geopolitics and network societies affecting the globalized economy, are corporate communicators moving toward being more cross-cultural communicators now and in the future? Maybe someone else earlier said, are we a bit too US focused? I'm thinking of something like AB InBev and Bud Light. Their US financials were down, and that was attributed to the Dylan Mulvaney thing. But globally, their numbers were up, and really, it was net up. And I wonder whether that was this is just me theorizing here. Wonder whether that was due to different attitudes in other parts of the world than in the US. But anyway, Alex, what's your view on that?
Are they? I think probably in patches. Should we be more globalized and cross-cultural? Absolutely. And that should be at the center of what everybody puts on their, commitment to themselves. Like, that's the joy of working in this job, is when you manage to connect people with really different backgrounds and you understand different cultures. I think we're not good enough at this, and we have to be. If this most recent conflict in the Middle East hasn't emphasized the interconnectedness of issues and the importance of understanding things from different perspectives, then nothing will. So I think it's a great comment, and we should all get better on that front.
Okay, this one's from Millie Vega. I'll send this to you, Yannick. To what extent should a corporate comms officer advise or be involved on an array of topics that they might not be experts on? Do you think expecting the CCO's functions to expand so much is appropriate for the organization's best interests?
I think if it's embedded in where the organization is going to, then yes. Then it's our job to continue to educate ourselves on the industry, understand operationally how that moves the needle for us. So yes, I think that's why it's so important to do things like what we're doing right now, but then also to talk to others in the industry too.
Okay, thank you. Ariel, Simeon Manams asks, should there be more comms leaders on boards? I think I know what the answer is going to be, but it is a shame that not as many sort of gravitate up to that level as we would like, I think.
Short answer, yes. I mean, I think it's actually similar to what Yannick was just talking about in terms of stretching yourself. I think the best communications people are complete nerds, intellectually curious, and can distill really complex ideas into something that resonates with anyone. We're sort of empaths, but also students by nature. And so for that reason, I think we can thrive in many different environments. And as I said earlier, as reputation becomes critical to the risk management framework at institutions, I actually think we could benefit to be on audit, on risk, not just governance and DEI committees. So I've actually been intentional on the nonprofit boards that I'm on, sitting on those committees, and I actually say, no, I think you can ask someone else. It doesn't have to be the Black person to sit on your NomGov or DEI committee, but I'm happy to opine when needed.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. Alex, Elizabeth Hurst asks, what roles do you think PR comms people will need to play in fighting misinformation and disinformation, not just in their own organizations, but in the wider community? What role should they play?
So this is probably my favorite topic. So whoever asked that question, well done on the telepathy front. It's such a big topic, but you cannot separate progress on any of the issues that I'm going to make an assumption 50% of or 60% of this audience cares about. And I'm not being prescriptive about what those issues are, but I'm just assuming that you're not in business only to make money. You cannot separate that question from what the next 5 years are going to look like in terms of the progress of generative AI. Cannot. And this is why I actually love Unique's kind of call to optimism and positivity and sort of look the glass half full. But we're going to see stress on our information systems unlike anything we've seen before. And we all have a leadership role to play. My point of view is very clear on this. I think that every board of directors and management team needs to have an information integrity strategy. That information integrity strategy should live at least at the same level as a cybersecurity or a business continuity strategy. If you don't, you are part of the problem in not keeping our information ecosystems healthy. And if you do, you're doing a very good, you're going to help yourself with some risk mitigation, that's for sure, as regulatory regimes tighten up. But don't forget, employers are the #1 source of trusted information. An employee newsletter is more trusted than the New York Times. Like, when we sit there and we're writing that newsletter and we're like, oh, does this really matter? And is anybody reading it? Don't forget, that's the most trusted source of information that's available to people these days. I trust my business and my CEO more than anybody else. That's a huge finding. So get after it, make yourself at the center of this conversation, learn about it, and whatever you do, don't allow your comms teams to be part of the problem. So I will volunteer. If you would like to do media literacy training, I got some great nonprofit partners from back in my Thomson Reuters days who would love to bring that skill set and actually help our people be the beacon for what media literacy looks like inside organizations. And I will take any phone call from anybody who's interested in that discussion.
Great offer. Take Alex up on that. I think Brittany has news of some handy research on disinformation that was launched just yesterday.
Yes, please check out our we have our 4th annual Disinformation in Society report with Leger that was just launched, and we shared a link to that with more information and a webinar coming up in January for all of those latest findings. But please check that out for what's going on in 2023 so far.
All right, great. We've got loads of questions and we're running out of time, which is a shame. So, but I'm sure there'll be a way to get those answered after the event and continue the discussion. A couple of quick ones to finish. I'll go around the room here. ES or G? This is from Mark Klein. Yannick.
All three. All three. Keep examining it. Keep looking at it. It's going to continue to evolve the conversation. All three.
Okay. Do we need any? Is everyone going to say the same thing? I don't know.
They're just not. They're inseparable.
Yeah.
It's like they just try working on climate change without working on human rights, or
Exactly.
can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although the labeling may change. I've heard CEOs say, "Look, we're committed to ESG, but if that becomes a sort of a toxic way of describing it, then we'll call it something else." But the core dependencies and strategies won't change. So yeah.
Our message on that is clear, though. Hold your ground.
Okay.
Be smarter, but hold your ground. We're very consistent on that. And again, if anybody wants to talk about that, happy to provide a ton of data on why.
Got it. And to finish off, Rosie Nelly Salguero, what are your words of advice for someone who's about to graduate with their bachelor's degree in public relations? Ariel, let you have that one first.
Do not pigeonhole yourself as a communicator or think that any topic is above you. I studied ancient Greek and Latin in college and taught myself finance. You know, bros sit around conference room tables and throw around acronyms like EBITDA and think it's fancy. It's not hard. Be curious, read everything, never be afraid to ask questions, and reach out to any of us if you need advice. I don't mean to offer the panel, but I think we all spend a decent amount of our time engaging with people like you.
That's a good point. I think PR people are fundamentally good people. That's why I like editing PR Week, and they are tremendously helpful, and they actually enjoy it. You know, that's part of what they do. You know, given within their constraints. But anyway, Alex, what would your advice be?
Oh, just to give me the sharp end of that question again, I got distracted by Ariel's answer about finance, which is absolutely right. It's worth learning. What's the sharp end of the question?
It is a student about to graduate in PR.
What should they
advice do you have for them?
Buckle up. No, kidding aside, buckle up. I would always say run after the most difficult problems. Always, and learn creativity at some point. I had the really good fortune of starting in like government relations and public policy and doing the sort of analytics stuff, but and always sort of looked a bit sideways at creativity. It was like, this is a bit fluffy, but actually spending time learning creativity is so powerful. So find somebody who can be like your mentor on what great creative looks like. And great creative can mean anything from a single line of copy through to, you know, poetry, through to, you know, how to edit and do multimedia or I don't know what, but just always have creativity, because it's the thing that makes you feel good when this life gets really kind of tough.
Nice one. And to finish off, Yannick.
I would add the same exact thing of what both of you have added, and be flexible and passionate about the work. Immerse yourself in the business. The more that you can do that, the more that you can learn. To Alex's point, don't run from a challenge, jump into the challenge. There are a lot of companies that are at pivotal moments. Some people are scared by that. Those can be the greatest learning experiences that benefits your career for years to come.
Yannick, briefly, because you made the point, just sorry, but don't you think, and I know we're at time, if you find yourself working with people that you kind of mesh with, this is like the most interesting job you can have inside an organization.
Oh, 100%. Company culture and team is what makes it. Absolutely, 100%.
Like it's tough, but it's fun, and it's really, really, really interesting. It's never ever dull.
Very much agree. Very much agree.
One thing for me, which is just to stay constantly curious and just stay open to new experiences, which is, I feel like, exactly what those on the call have said.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And that's what the report findings tell us as well. So do check that out. Big virtual round of applause to Alex, Ariel, and Yannick. Great input there and great advice. Really enjoyed chatting to you. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. I don't know if someone's going to do a closeout here or.
Yeah, no, I was just going to thank you all, Steve, all of our panelists, Margot, for joining us and sharing. I know you all are incredibly busy, so we appreciate you sharing all of those insights with our network. And thanks everyone for joining and for your questions. And
thank you, Brittany.
Next one. Yes, thank you. Bye.
Okay, take care.
All right, take care.